who up to now had been considered as simply different, start to be perceived as putting into question our identity, as threatening our existence. And of course, in this case, it can be completely phantasmatic. It does not mean that they are really doing that. Now, of course, it could be the case, but it's enough to believe, that the them is putting into question our existence for this relation as them to be transformed into an antagonistic one. Because from that moment on, any form of us-them relation, it could be religious, ethnic, or economic, becomes then the locus of an antagonism. What is important to acknowledge here is that the very condition of possibility of formation of political identities is at the same time the condition of impossibility for a society from which antagonism would have been eliminated. Because, of course, if we assert that collective identities are always constructed as us-them relation, that this us-them relation can always, in certain circumstances, be transformed into an antagonistic one, then we must accept that antagonism is something that is an ever-present possibility in society. I mean, in order for not to have antagonism, you will have to have the end of collective identities. When the shortcomings of liberal theory are taken into account, it becomes clear why, in order to understand the nature of democratic politics and the challenge to which it is confronted, we need an alternative to the two main approaches that exist in political theory. On one side, there is what is called the aggregative approach, and the other side, the deliberative one. Because neither of those approaches is able to recognize this antagonistic dimension of the political. And this is, of course, what I have tried to develop an alternative approach, which I call an agonistic conception of democracy. The aggregative model, to explain a little bit, what's the problem with those views, sees political actors as being moved by the pursuit of their interest. And they act in the field of politics simply in order to pursue their interest. The deliberative model, which has been, in fact, developed in partisan criticism of this aggregative approach, stresses the role of reason and moral consideration. I mean, it's represented in philosophy by the work of John Rawls in the US and Jürgen Habermas in Germany. But what I want to insist is that both approaches, the aggregative and the deliberative, of course there are many very important differences, but albeit in a different way, they posit the availability of a consensus that will be reached through rational procedure. Of course, the procedures are different. In the first case, we've got the type of instrumental rationality. In the case of deliberative democracy, it's a communicative rationality. But, my point is that in both cases, they are form of rationalism. Another problem with both models, and I think that in the field of politics is really very damaging, is that they leave aside the central role which is played by what I call passion in the creation of collective political identities. Here I want to specify that by passion I'm not referring to individual passion. I'm referring to the affective dimension which is at work in the creation of collective form of identification. I mean, this is, in that sense that I call passion. So it's basically the affective dimension which is central in the field of politics. And my claim is that it is not possible to envisage democratic politics without acknowledging passion as a moving force in the field of politics. So if, and of course the elimination of passion is really, the center of the rationalist approach. So by eliminating this dimension, we cannot really understand what's at stake in democratic politics. And this is precisely in order to remedy all those deficiencies that I have elaborated this alternative model of democracy, which I call agonistic, and which attempts tackling all the issues which cannot be properly addressed by the two previous models because of their rationalist but also individualistic framework, because in both cases, of course, aggregative and deliberative, they start with individual. They believe that one can need to only think in terms of individual. They are unable to envisage the creation of collective identities. In a nutshell, my argument in the agonistic democracy goes as follows. Once we acknowledge the dimension that I call the political, we begin to realize that one of the main challenges for democratic politics consists in trying to diffuse the potential antagonism that exists in human relations. Indeed, the fundamental question for democratic politics is not, as we are told by the liberal, how to arrive at a rational consensus. Consensus that will be reached without any form of exclusion, because that will require the construction of an us that will not have a corresponding them. But this is precisely what I've argued is impossible, because the very condition for the constitution of an us is the demarcation of a them. So the crucial issue for democratic politics is not to eliminate the us-them, but is how to establish the us-them dimension, which I consider to be constitutive of politics, in a way which is compatible with the recognition of pluralism. Which all states agree through democratic procedure that a third-party judge will have the coercive power to resolve their conflict. Well, such a democratic international leviathan that will be a global hegemon. The democratic order that Bobbio advocates will in fact be a unipolar world where, in the name of universalism, the Western model of democracy, but probably, but it could be another one, will have been imposed worldwide. At least one model will be imposed worldwide. And this will have, I think, dire consequences. And we are in fact already witnessing how current attempts to homogenize the world are provoking violent adverse reaction from those societies whose specific values or culture are rendered illegitimate by the enforced universalization of the Western model. I think it is clear that far from creating the condition for a more peaceful world, the unipolar world that has resulted from the demise of the Soviet Union has led to the emergence of new antagonism. So the truth that I want to share with you is that it is urgent to become aware of the danger implied in the illusion of a globalist, universalist discourse, which envisage human progress as the establishment of world unity based on the acceptance of the Western model. By imagining the possibility of a unification of the world that could be achieved by transcending the political, transcending conflict, and transcending negativity, such a discourse risk, I think, to bring about precisely the class of civilization that it claims to be avoiding. At this stage in the process of globalization, I do not want, of course, to deny the need for a set of institutions to regulate international relations. But those institutions should allow for a significant degree of pluralism, and they should not require the existence of a single unified power structure. We should therefore relinquish the very idea of a pactum subjectionis among states and acknowledge that peace in a pluralist world can only be reached through the establishment of a variety of pactum societatis. That is a multiplicity of pragmatic multilateral agreements which will always remain precarious and contingent. Against Bobbio's illusion that a pacific state could ever be reached in the field of international relations, it is, I think, necessary to accept that the